Welcome to COM 707 Philosophy and Communication. In this video, I will be going over Chapter 8 and Chapter 9 of McLuhan's 1944 book called Understanding Media, The Extensions of Man. First and foremost, McLuhan is known for coining the phrase, the medium is the message, which essentially means that the way that we send and receive information is more important than the information itself. McLuhan also created a framework for labeling different media as either hot or cold. Hot media provides tons of stimulus yet requires little involvement. Hot media is high definition because it is the state of being filled with data. We could also say that hot media is well defined and the quality is very high. Or, as McLuhan stated, it extends one single sense in high definition. For example, radio is hot because it focuses singularly on the sense of hearing, meaning that it communicates its intended message entirely via sound. Cold media, on the other hand, is low in definition and requires more participation. So this translates into the notion that cold media provides little stimulus and requires lots of involvement, meaning that more than one sense is involved. In McLuhan's words, cold refers to the fact that so little is given and so much has to be filled in by the listener. For example, video games are considered a cold medium because they involve sight and sound, touch, and making choices. People are filled with less data, yet they have to immerse themselves into the game, so participation is high. Okay, with that, let's get started with Chapter 8, which is called The Spoken Word, Flower of Evil. It's rather an interesting name for a chapter, but by now we know that McLuhan is all about metaphors and making us think outside the box. So, the spoken word. It might sound like an easy topic to cover, but in reality, the spoken word for McLuhan is dramatic. It's dramatic in that it engages the listener through all five senses. So you can say that spoken word experiences are participatory, sensuous, unified, involved. The best way to think about this is to think of how we communicate based on our feelings. McLuhan mentioned that there are not many ways of writing tonight, and then goes on to give us an example of a film director who used to ask his young actors to pronounce and stress tonight 50 different ways while the audience wrote down the different shades of feeling and meaning expressed. Going back to the phrase, the medium is the message, where does speech fit in all of this? First of all, speech is quick and implicit and evokes an immediate reaction. McLuhan stated that we tend to react to each situation that occurs, reacting in tone and gesture, even to our own act of speaking. Speech is also meant to reach its art form because it is an extension or uttering of all of our senses at once, and it also invokes collectivism. When we think about how a speech is altering us as people and as society, it's important to point out that orally based cultures had an aversion for silence. But today, we're actually seeking a quiet space where we can unplug from everything. So while speech allowed man to extend its collective consciousness or intuitive awareness with a sense of style, in today's world, people are not as articulate as they once were. Electronic technology has significantly impacted our language and especially in-person interactions. Spoken conversations have been replaced with emojis, Snapchat, Instagram, Reel videos, you name it. But perhaps the most negative aspect of all is that these new generations lack social skills and therefore affect the whole idea of the medium is the message. Maybe this is what McLuhan meant with flower of evil as a metaphor, where speech is the representation of a flower or a beautiful thing that allows us to communicate, but somehow turned out to be evil over time because external factors like technology came to light, and perhaps electric technology, as McLuhan refers to it, now hinder our ability to communicate. It makes me think of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, but the flower is the apple. Any thoughts? Now, let's take a look at the medium's temperature. It is quite evident that speech as a medium is very cold in the context of face-to-face interactions. Why? Because it requires a lot of participation, and we almost have to decode what someone is telling us by watching their nonverbal behavior, such as body language. We have to be attentive to their tone of voice and perhaps their level of immediacy, like how close they get to you, they hug you, or if they pat you on the back when you say hi, all of that. We could argue that speech is cold, but depending on who you talk to, right? To close the chapter, it is clear that communication electronically eliminates the need for the spoken word. I want to mention the last quote in this chapter, which states, "The condition of weightlessness that biologists say promises a physical immortality may be paralleled by the condition of speechlessness that could confer a perpetuity of collective harmony and peace." Now, this definitely leaves us thinking, flower of evil, what do you think? All right, we are now moving on to chapter 9, which is called The Written Word, an Eye for an Ear. This is an interesting medium from McLuhan's perspective because rather than being dramatic like speech, the written word is a unique technology represented in the phonetic alphabet. It is unique because it creates a binary distinction of civilized versus uncivilized societies. In fact, McLuhan argued that the invention of the Greek alphabet initiated the rise of civilized humanity. And cultures that use non-phonetic alphabet essentially don't have access to the freedom that individuality affords the West. He claimed that only the phonetic alphabet makes such a sharp division in experience, giving to its user an eye for an ear, and freeing him from the tribal trance of resonating word magic and the web of kinship. He goes on to say that separateness of the individual, continuity of space and of time, and universality of codes are the prime marks of literate and civilized societies. Going back to the phrase, the medium is the message, where does the written word fit in all of this? First of all, phonetic writing separates and extends the visual power of words. The written word also spells out in sequence and therefore gives little opportunity or call for reaction. It diminishes the role of the other senses like sound and touch. Lastly, McLuhan mentioned that it amplifies habits of individualism and privacy. When we think about how this medium is altering us as people and as society, it is important to point out that our Western values built on the written word have already been considerably affected by the electric media of the telephone, radio, and TV, among many others. Looking back, the phonetically written word sacrificed worlds of meaning and perception that were secured by forms like the hieroglyph and the Chinese ideogram. According to McLuhan, because of its action in extending our central nervous system, electric technology seems to favor the inclusive and participational spoken word over the specialist written word. This is why written news stories have been replaced with 140-character tweets. People just don't have time to read, and therefore, it affects the idea of the medium is the message. This is why McLuhan used the an eye for an ear metaphor. It essentially means that people are overloaded with so much of the written word, and especially through the internet, that the eyes have become the ear. People make the act of writing as quick and as implicit as possible to evoke an immediate reaction, just like speech. So what this tells us is that writing as a medium is somewhat hot, but it's all contingent upon context. What I mean by that is writing down thoughts on a journal or even writing a paper for school differ in temperature than when writing a text or writing a caption to share with friends and family. Some will require lots of participation and some others don't. So it really just depends on the context. Regardless of circumstance, the written word is being condensed to less words, and just even pictures. To close this chapter, electronic technology and the overload of mediums significantly diminishes the need for the written word into a fraction of what should be originally composed. So, despite of how this medium continues to evolve, as McLuhan mentioned, writing gives us homogeneity, uniformity, and continuity. Alright, so that is a wrap. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you have any questions about the content in this lecture in the discussion board. Alright, thanks.